Smarties, today we are excited to welcome Diane Gould to the podcast to discuss pathological demand avoidance. She shares how she got interested in PDA, her involvement with bringing awareness of PDA to the United States, and how behavioral strategies don't typically work for those with PDA. She explains about how those with pathological demand avoidance avoid tasks as a matter of can't, not won't. She shares some ideas about how to support those with PDA through building trust, prioritizing connection, and prioritizing collaboration through partnership and the sharing of demands. We would love for you to connect further with Diane. We found out during the recording of this episode that she will be releasing a book this summer, so we will be excited to have her back. You can find all her contact info in the show notes to this episode. Let's dig in.
You want to learn faster, but sometimes working harder is just not the answer. You have to learn smarter. The Educational Therapy Podcast.
Hi, Smarties. Welcome to episode 309 of Learn Smarter, the Educational Therapy Podcast. I'm Stephanie Pitts.
And I'm Rachel Kapp.
And today we are really excited to have Diane Gould with us, and she is here to talk about pathological demand avoidance. So welcome, Diane.
I'm so happy to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. So we'd love for you to take a second and introduce yourself to our audience and share a little bit about who and where you are and the work that you do.
I'm Diane Gould. I have a private practice in a suburb of Chicago. I'm a clinical social worker, and I've been a social worker for decades and decades. I became a behavior analyst for about 15 years at some point, and then quit being a behavior analyst. So I added that to the initials after my name, but I'm still fascinated with human behavior. I've focused my practice on serving neurodivergent children, adults, and their families, and really specialized in autistic folks. And things changed a bit about 4 years ago when a parent wouldn't take no for an answer when I kept saying, I don't want to learn something new. And she had found PDA on her research and kept sending me articles after articles and made me read them. And I became really interested in PDA, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a sec, because the approach to supporting people who fit this profile was very consistent with the approach I've been using for my clients, both autistic clients and clients with trauma histories. And I just thought, this is really fascinating. And I held the first PDA conference in America in March 2020. And now we've had an annual conference since, and the interest has just grown and grown and grown.
Good timing on that conference.
Yeah.
And our speakers came from the UK, so we got them on the last flights back.
Wow.
Oh, how stressful.
Yeah, we bought all the hand sanitizer in the hotel gift shop.
Oh, wow.
It was really stressful, but in some ways it was fortunate because when the world shut down the week after, it gave me some time to step back and pause, because at the first PDA conference, it became apparent that it needed to be a beginning, not an end. And I had only really thought as far as having this conference. So I was able to get a website up and running so families could, show people it and say, look, it's a real thing that even has a website.
Mm-hmm.
Got a lot done over the pandemic.
Well, amazing.
A productive pandemic for you.
Yes.
That's how I found you.
Oh, really?
I have a client that has PDA, and I started researching more, and then I saw the stuff in the UK, and then I said, there has to be something here. And so then I put in North America, and then it came up, and then there you were, and I was like, she's it.
She's who we want.
Well, I did it totally on my own until recently, and now we have some part-time people and volunteers.
Good for you. That's awesome.
The first years I just kind of punted.
Yeah.
We all do.
You fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, the first conference I had books to sell, but I had no way of taking payment. Like, how do we buy it? I'm like, I'm a social worker. I don't know how to do this stuff. So I'm learning as I go.
There you go.
Amazing.
So let's start with what is PDA? Because Steph was said, we're going to have someone come on the podcast and chat about PDA. And I'm thinking public displays of affection. I'm like, oh, Steph, that's really not in our lane. Okay, so she's wearing a shirt.
PDA, and it says it's not what you think. That's hilarious.
Yeah, it's really embarrassing. It's not great initials. And unfortunately, the name's not great either.
Okay.
So it stands for Pathological Demand Avoidance. And now many people are using the name Pervasive Drive for Autonomy instead. So that's the preferred name. But since we're kind of trying to start this movement, we thought we can't mess with the name. And it was named on purpose, pathological. So the history is that in the 1980s in London, a leading psychologist who was doing many, many assessments for kids with potential autism noticed that there was this subgroup of kids that were very different than the majority of kids she was diagnosing as autistic, but they were very much like each other. And one of the characteristics that stood out for her in this subgroup, which she named a profile, was that they had demand avoidance. And they couldn't do just everyday demands like taking a shower, brushing their teeth, or doing homework. And they couldn't help it. So she named it pathological because she wanted people to understand that it wasn't on purpose, that they just couldn't help it. It was out of their control. So she on purpose named it pathological. But now that's pushed back.
Okay, so now we have what pathological avoidance.
At least it started. So I can tell you a little bit more about it. Do you want me just to tell you some more basics?
Yeah.
Assume we and our audience don't know anything about it.
Okay. So as I said, in the 1980s, that the psychologist started talking about this subgroup or profile of autistic people. And then over probably the next 30 years in the UK especially, this awareness grew where papers were being presented, a book was published, and the PDA Society in the UK was established. And then we started later, but we're catching up.
Yeah.
So PDA is best understood as an autistic profile. We don't consider it a standalone profile, which means a PDA person is also an autistic person, but not all autistic people are PDA.
Okay.
So you've got this demand avoidance and drive for autonomy. And the demand avoidance is a key characteristic, but it's not everything. And what's important for people to understand too is that expectations are demands. So it's not just what you're told to do. Expectations are demands, but things you want for yourself can be demands. And sometimes even internal components like hunger or thirst can be demands.
Okay. So how does this show up in kids? How does it show up in adults? Is it different? What does it look like?
It's not that different from adults to kids. And these individuals have that drive for autonomy. They like to learn on their own. They're usually creative and have many interests. PDA people often are very socially motivated. They like being with people, even though sometimes there's issues in relationships or understanding the social landscape because they're autistic. But on the whole, they're very social. PDA people are often very talkative. They make eye contact. So when parents take their child or an adult goes for an assessment because they think they're PDA or they think they're autistic, they're often told they can't be autistic because they make eye contact, they have friends, they're really social, they're talkative.
Mm-hmm.
And parent after parent over the years have talked about thinking their child was autistic but couldn't get a psychologist or their child's school to agree that the person was autistic because it looks different. It's also much more inclusive of girls and women because our kind of typical understanding in America of autism is really a behavioral checklist that is kind of based on boys and men.
Yeah.
So it's a much broader, more accurate way of looking at autism. And it also means that sometimes people who fit this profile aren't diagnosed or they're not picked up. So they're kind of left alone to suffer because people don't recognize their needs. And PDAers understand the expectations, so they really try to please. So they might make excuses when they're told to do something or negotiate
or lie or yeah.
Right. And they're accused of all that because they don't want to just blatantly refuse. So they use their social understanding to kind of navigate things. One of the things that makes it really hard with this population is that because PDA kids understand the expectations, many kind of hold it together in school and just try not to get noticed. And then they come home and fall apart, or even in the car, their parents pick them up and they fall apart in the car because they've held it together. And then they can have huge meltdowns, emotional displays at home. And when the parents talk to the school about that their child has all these needs and needs supports, they're told by the school, like, well, he's perfect at school, or she's an angel. It must be a home problem, must be a parenting problem, just being more strict or disciplined more, set, boundaries and limits. And one of the things we know about these kids who have high anxiety, they all do, and a need for control, because that's what helps with anxiety, is that PDA individuals do not benefit from rewards or consequence. They can't handle praise. So all the behavioral kind of strategies used for autistic students not only don't work, but they can make things worse for PDA individuals.
Okay, so I want to hear more about this because I think it's important. And when I'm thinking about my client in particular, it's how to help at home and help her because she can't really explain why she can't do it or isn't doing it.
Right. And a lot of individuals, autistic and PDA individuals, they're not really strong in terms of interoception, feelings, emotions, understanding their body, especially to a point that it can be at a conscious level.
Yeah.
Being able to articulate it too. And a lot of PDAers don't know why. It's just they can't. So one of the big things we say in the PDA world is it's a question of can't, not won't. So if a teacher say, well, he won't do his math assignment or do their homework, we always say it's can't. They can't do it because PDAers often want to do their work or they want to go to school and they can't. Around the 70% of PDAers don't attend school regularly.
Wow. That's a high number.
Really.
So they're homeschooled or
unschooled, or in high school they drop out and then take a GED later.
Okay.
Again, it's not because they don't want to go. And one of the patterns that is really striking with this population and unique to this population, in my experience, is often when the kids stop being able to go, they can't get out that door. Often they have had zero problems at school. So it comes as such a shock to the school. Like, we thought he was okay. We thought she was doing fine. Because they hold it together and mask during school until they can't do it one more minute.
Is there a typical age where this sort of emerges?
Not really. I know 3-4-year-olds.
Wow. Let's talk about how it's not a diagnosis.
Yeah, there's a bunch of people who want PDA to be a standalone diagnosis and be in the DSM. To me, that's such a lower priority. I think it's fine with it being a profile of autism, and autism is a diagnosis and is in the DSM. It is improving that more psychologists who do assessments and diagnose and doctors understand PDA and view autism more broadly, including the PDA profile, and then make sure their recommendations fit PDA kids and adults. They don't just acknowledge the PDA profile and then go back to the traditional autistic recommendations that are not going to help and are going to hurt.
My question is, can someone be PDA but not autistic?
So there's differences in opinion.
Okay, because I saw a little bit about it online, which is why I'm very interested.
Yes, there's differences of opinion. So some of us are purists and say you can't be PDA without being autistic.
Okay.
Some people who I respect think you might be able to be PDA if you have a nonverbal learning disorder.
Okay.
But I know online and stuff, people are saying, oh, maybe some ADHDers also have PDA.
So there's not consensus in the field yet.
The vast majority of us feel you have to be autistic.
Okay.
I have a book coming out in June, and that's the position of the book.
Well, we're going to want to hear more about the book. Steph and I will have an opportunity to read it and come back on the podcast and we can talk more about it. Yeah. Come advertise the book.
Yes.
So you've mentioned a little bit about how typical strategies that we would anticipate may work aren't going to work for this population, which begs the question, what do we do?
Yeah.
How do we support them?
Across the board, there's plenty people can do to support PDAers of any age.
Okay.
And age isn't as important. The books say they don't see hierarchy and age differences. Some might see it, they just don't think it's relevant. Like, why would I act differently and automatically act more respectfully for someone because they're older or a police officer or a principal? Like, why would just that title call for me to act differently?
Mm-hmm.
More social justice and fairness based. But back to what works. Building trust, number one. The number one important way to support PDA people of any age is to build trust. Because trust and connection is what helps a nervous system not be in fight, flight, or freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And everything has to come from this trusting relationship. And also through the relationship, you'd have collaboration and partnership. So making plans together and executing together. So instead of, here, you do these 5 math problems, it would be, let's do these 5 math problems together. Or you work it out and I'll write it down. Or however it works, partnership. And that goes from cleaning the bedroom, washing the dishes, or schoolwork. Partnership and collaboration. And the collaboration can look like, do you think we can do multiplication today, or do you think that's better another day? I think those are really important. Partnership and collaboration and sharing demands. It's really hard for lots of PDA people to be bored. And I think making the work engaging and interesting without a lot of redundancy.
Mm-hmm.
Redundancy, and a lot of our schoolwork is really redundant. I think that's hard
Yes.
for kids. And they usually have tons of interests and they love to learn. So there's a lot to build on. Making things more playful can make a difference. Sometimes even as a challenge.
Yeah.
PDA people are generally really creative and imaginative. So using imagination. PDA individuals often go into fantasy or roles to avoid complying with demands, but they also can go into fantasy and roles to comply with demands. The same as negotiation. Some people negotiate to get out of demands, like I'll do it tomorrow or I'll just do it this way. But PDA people often negotiate to be able to meet a demand. So if you would say, all right, you can have a 10-minute break on your iPad, they might say 15, because that will allow them to be able to get off in 15, to have things more under their control.
I see.
I think giving an out for PDAers makes a big difference. I think if someone feels trapped, they might not be able to go to a session or even go to school, and have a way out can really make a difference. And they have to trust that you're not going to push them. You're not going to say, well, one more, or just do this and then we can quit. Autonomy to me is like oxygen, that they just need it to be.
To exist. So to sort of sum everything up, I certainly didn't know about this before Steph brought it to my attention, and I would imagine it's not super well known amongst our audience. So what is it that you want everybody to sort of know and understand about PDA?
It's a great question. A lot of things. And the awareness is growing. It's really exciting.
Yes.
For us. I want people to know that people who fit this profile are not making a conscious choice to mess with people, to go against what they're told, that they have very sensitive nervous systems with a very sensitive threat response, and they are going into fight, flight, or freeze. They can have behavioral challenges, but it's really best thought of as a panic attack. Empathy when that's happening, not consequences and punishment. I want people to know that behavioral strategies, including ones designed for autistic people, are not going to help, and they're going to make things worse. PDA people need empathy and support and understanding. They don't need demands or just tough love or being pushed or pressured. None of that is going to help. I want people to understand that usually the parents have figured this out earlier, so professionals need to listen to the parents. And life can be really tricky for parents of kids. Mm-hmm. And pushing them to get their kid to school is not going to help anyone. That these kids need a ton of flexibility and doing things differently.
Well, we're going to have you back to chat about the book, so there'll be more opportunities to talk about it.
Diane, this has been so eye-opening. We both really appreciate, and our audience really appreciates all the things that you have just enlightened us with. But how can people get in touch with you? And tell us about your book really quickly, where people will be able to get it. This episode is coming out at the end of April. We're recording this in April, so it will be soon after this episode releases. So please tell us.
So to get a hold of me, my email is dgould847@gmail.com or through dianegouldtherapy.com. Or for PDA North America, the email is info@pdanorthamerica.org. We became a nonprofit last year. So I haven't had any time to write grants or fundraise. So we're really a nonprofit, but I get better at that.
One step at a time.
Yes. And the book comes out in June. It's Navigating PDA in America. It's already on Amazon for pre-order.
Okay.
So excited about that.
We're excited to have you back this summer to chat more about the book. And thank you so much for taking the time to come and share about this with our audience. We appreciate it.
Yeah, we definitely do.
Thank you all so much. I really want people to know PDA. So I appreciate this.
Amazing.
Okay, so have a great week, Smarties.
Have a great week.